Hello, dear students. This is a short video on writing, particularly writing about the ancient world, but a lot of the advice will apply to any kind of writing. And it's designed just to help you focus your papers and develop your papers. Let's start with the thesis statement. It's important to remember that every thesis should be three things: narrow, specific, and debatable. Narrow means you don't try to cover everything, of course. Specific means you specify exactly what you will cover. And debatable doesn't mean necessarily controversial or a sort of flashpoint type discussion. It simply means, could a reasonable person disagree? Is there a counter position to it? So you want to make sure in academic writing that every thesis you write is narrow, specific, and debatable. And how do you get to that thesis? Well, first you ask yourself a question, and then you focus a specific and debatable answer to that question. So the kind of question you might attempt to answer could be something like, how did the view of suffering change over time in ancient Greece? Now, there are a lot of ways you could respond to this. What you want to make sure you do is respond to it with a specific line of argument. So definitely not something like, the Greeks had a lot of different views about suffering. There's no line of argument there, and the paper that results from that thesis is probably going to wander around purposelessly rather than focusing in. A lot of times organizational problems in papers start with thesis problems. Without a focused thesis, it's very hard to write an organized paper. So what would a focused thesis look like in response to a question like this? Where one possible answer is something like, Homer believed suffering to be an inevitable part of human life. But during the Golden Age of Athens, thinkers like Aeschylus were encouraged by the stability and prosperity of the age to believe that good government and reasonable laws can at least greatly mitigate human suffering. So now you have a line of argument that's going to look at Homer, and it's going to contrast it with the view in Aeschylus, and it's going to ground that view of Aeschylus in the prosperity and the government in Athens. So already, just looking at the thesis, you can map out 3 or 4 or maybe even more paragraphs that naturally belong in this paper, and even think about the order in which they belong. So you might have your introduction followed by a paragraph or 2 on Homer's suffering, depending on the length of the paper. You might look at that in the Iliad and then a new paragraph in the Odyssey, and how those epics view the inevitability of suffering. You'd look at specific scenes or passages in Homer to support that. And then you might move on from there to the Golden Age of Athens and describe the kind of stability and prosperity that Athens achieved, and then a paragraph talking about Aeschylus or more, depending on how many plays within the Oresteia or other works like Prometheus Bound you want to explore. And then you might look at close passages in Aeschylus, look closely at them and think about how they reflect faith in law and reason and government to lessen suffering in human life. So a good thesis will give you a line of argument to pursue. It won't leave you casting around, wandering around vaguely. So here's another question you might be asked in a course on the ancient world. How does the Greek idea of Moira, often translated fate, differ from the Hebrew concepts of covenant and the promised land? Right? So you're being asked to contrast them. You do not want to respond to this with a thesis that is something like, the Greek idea of Moira is different from the Hebrew concepts of the covenant and the promised land, right? That's too vague, that's too wide and flimsy. You want to focus in on a line of argument that makes a specific series of points about the difference. So you might come up with something like, While Homer and Sophocles present an inscrutable and impersonal fate that cares nothing for human beings, the Bible depicts human destiny as being in the hands of a benevolent God. Now, that's not really the thesis, that's the build-up to the thesis. And your thesis might be something like, thus, the Greeks saw human flourishing as at odds with the desires of divinity, but the Hebrews saw God as the source of their well-being. So now you're going to explore that specific contrast in the way these concepts, these different concepts, create a different orientation to the relationship between man and God. You focused the question in to make a thesis. So then, just to reiterate, every thesis should be narrow, specific, and debatable. It should provide a focused, specific, debatable answer to a question. Whether it's a question asked by your professors, as many times papers are, or whether it's an open question left up to you to craft and determine, as many term papers will be as you advance in your studies. Second in importance to the thesis is the topic sentence. Every paragraph should have a topic sentence, and the topic sentence should be something you write on purpose. You shouldn't just sort of start writing and hope the paragraph somehow coheres. You should intentionally begin every paragraph with a topic sentence that does three things. Well, really does two things and maybe a third. Right? So definitely that indicates the content of the paragraph, but it's got to do more than that. It should also somehow connect the paragraph back to the thesis. In other words, it may not do this explicitly, but at least implicitly, you should be able to read that topic sentence and be able to tell why that paragraph is in the paper in support of the thesis. A really good way to check this, a trick I learned a long time ago. Read your thesis, then read each topic sentence. Don't read anything else, just the thesis and then each topic sentence. And if it sounds like a coherent paragraph, you might have good topic sentences. But if it's disconnected and confusing, if it doesn't make sense, you probably don't have good topic sentences. So very important to remember, topic sentences shouldn't just say what the paragraph is about, but they should give you some understanding of why the paragraph is there. Then the less important thing, the third thing, is that it's nice when a topic sentence gives the reader a sense of his or her place within the progress of the argument. Right? In other words, if it's a kind of signpost along the way. So let's look at some examples. Let's say you have a thesis that is something like, because ancient literature depicts human suffering in compelling and powerful ways, reading great books prepares a nurse to face the suffering he or she will encounter every day at work. So let's say you've been assigned to write about great books and your future vocation, and you happen to be a nursing major. Okay, so this is a good thesis. It's narrowed down to suffering and nursing. It's specific about preparing you to face that suffering at work, so you have a good thesis. A bad topic sentence, one you would want to avoid, would be something like, nurses can benefit as much as anyone from reading great books. Right? That doesn't really support your thesis in any way. Right? In fact, it simply repeats it in a vague form. If your topic sentences are just rephrasing your thesis, your paper probably lacks organization. It's very important to remember. If your topic sentences simply rephrase your thesis, your paper probably lacks organization. You should be able, in fact, to read your thesis, say the word because, then read your topic sentence, and have it be a meaningful statement. Right? If you were to say, because ancient literature depicts human suffering, or Because ancient literature depicts human suffering in compelling and powerful ways, reading great books prepares a nurse to face the suffering he or she will encounter every day at work. Because nurses can benefit as much as anyone from reading great books, that's obviously not really an argument so much as it's just a begging of the question, a doubling down. And so what's a better topic sentence? You might have something like, a nurse witnesses a lot of suffering in the course of a regular day at work as your first topic sentence. Obviously, that paragraph is establishing the grounds of the reasoning. In other words, if you're going to argue that literature prepares nurses for suffering, you need to establish that nurses do indeed encounter a lot of suffering. That's what that topic sentence is doing. Reading that sentence, I know why that paragraph is there. Okay, this paragraph is here to establish the suffering. Then your next paragraph might start with, the Iliad offers a very frank view of human suffering. Now I know not only is this paragraph about the Iliad, but I know that its frankness about human suffering is why it's a good preparation for a career as a nurse. Then your next topic sentence might say something like, the Stoics offer much valuable advice on how to face suffering with dignity and courage. Now I know, one, that this paragraph is about the Stoics, and I know, two, that this paragraph talks about how Stoicism gives advice about suffering and dignity, and that's implied for the thesis. So I can read my thesis, say because, and then I have this topic sentence, and it all makes sense, right? And we also have paragraphs sorted, and we can maintain paragraph unity. In the Iliad paragraph, you don't wander off and start talking about the Stoics. And in the Stoics paragraph, you don't wander back to talking about the Iliad. You want to make sure that each paragraph makes a distinct and clear point. You want each paragraph to make a distinct and clear point. And then you might have a final topic sentence that says something like, finally, and there's that signpost, one finds throughout ancient literature the reminder that human beings are mortal, and the nurse who has faced this truth in literary form is better prepared to experience it for himself or herself. So the previous paragraphs are talking about various kinds of suffering, but in specific works. I guess it'd be the fourth paragraph, is talking, fourth body paragraph, is talking not about general kinds of suffering in specific works, but about a specific kind of suffering, death, in several works. So if you've already done the Iliads and the Stoics, you'd very likely choose something else here. You might talk about death in Agamemnon or in the Sophocles plays, or extending on in the Aeneid, if you're covering Rome as well. So the point is, each topic sentence should give a clear reason for the paragraph's existence and relate that paragraph to the thesis in a clear, argumentative way. If you can't do that with your paragraphs, you probably don't have unified, focused paragraphs. So when working on paragraphs, you want to remember the importance of paragraph unity, having a clear, distinct point. What makes this paragraph different from every other paragraph in the paper, and how does every sentence in this paragraph contribute to that distinction and purpose? You want to focus on paragraph organization. Don't just throw it all in there. Why does each sentence follow the one before it? What is the best organization for the paragraph? This is one reason why it's almost always best to start with an outline. Start with a detailed outline and write from that. Now I want to transition a little bit to talk specifically about discussing books, literature broadly conceived, great books in your writing. One thing to keep in mind is that when you talk about literature, you shouldn't just throw in quotes. You should always discuss what you quote. The primary means of doing that when discussing literature is what we call close reading, right? Looking at the details of the passage. So with paragraph unity, paragraph organization, and literary close reading or analysis in mind, let's look at a few example paragraphs on ancient literature. So imagine you were writing a paper and your thesis was, as we explored before, thus the Greeks saw human flourishing as at odds with the desires of divinity, but the Hebrews saw God as the source of their well-being. So this is a paragraph from somewhere in that paper. It's not necessarily the first body paragraph. It might be, but it's going to fall somewhere in the argument. First, you have a topic sentence. At several key moments in the Odyssey, the satisfaction of human needs are surprisingly elevated above even the will of the gods. So look at what this topic sentence does. First, it tells you you're writing about the Odyssey, and I want you to notice this whole paragraph will be on the Odyssey. That's 90% of the time the best strategy to take when writing about literature. Not to throw a bunch of books into one paragraph, because then you're not really going to say a whole lot about any of them, but rather to take the whole paragraph, at least a paragraph, if not several, take at least a paragraph to develop a specific point about that specific piece of literature. So the Odyssey, right? This is how it's specific. And we're not even just talking about the Odyssey. We're talking about those moments in the Odyssey when human needs are elevated above the will of the gods. Right? And so that gives this paragraph a very specific focus. It's not a topic sentence like also we see this in the Odyssey. Right? Also we see this in the Odyssey is too vague. This focuses us in on human need and the will of the gods in one specific poem. Okay, so let's read this paragraph and then you can kind of see how the organization and the development works. At several key moments in the Odyssey, the satisfaction of human needs are surprisingly elevated above even the will of the gods. Eurylochos, for instance, compellingly argues that even should the gods punish them for eating the cattle of Helios, he would, quote, rather gulp down salt water and die once and for all than waste away slowly on a desert island. Okay, so now we've quoted. Look what we do next. Such an argument would make no sense in the piety of the Hebrews. Job says, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. So notice the paragraphs on the Odyssey. We have a reference back to Job here. That's okay. We're not shifting the focus to Job. We're using it as a contrast. In fact, what that is doing there is commenting on the passage we gave, quoting Eurylochos from the Odyssey. So we're not just dropping quotations in, right? We're working with them. And then we have more commentary on that. In Homer's humanist and anthropomorphic concept of divinity, however, there is no reason to honor the will of the gods for its own sake. Indeed, at one point, the incident of the Phaeacian ship, a human willingly takes on the wrath of the gods, not for his own interests, but rather solely in order to benefit a fellow human. Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians, says, and then we have this quotation. Notice, by the way, that the poem is quoted with the lines intact. Right? You don't run it all together like prose. You break each line accordingly as it's printed. And notice you cite it with the book and line numbers. This is how we do when working with poetry, particularly epic poetry, with the book and line citation. So Alcinous, king of the Phaeacians, says, alas, for the prophecy of old that I heard from my father. He said that Poseidon would be angry with us for giving safe passage, and that one day he would wreck a beautiful ship as it sailed for home over the misty sea, and he would hem our city in with a mountain. What the old man said is all coming true. Cite the book and line numbers. Now notice we've just quoted something extensively. If you quote extensively like that, you need to discuss it fairly extensively by looking at the details. That is the actual words on the page, the text of the poem. So that's what happens following this. Notice we don't indent. Again, this is the same paragraph following up discussing the quotation. That the passage was prophesied is repeated at the end of the speech in order to highlight Alcinous' full knowledge of the consequences. So notice this writer is now writing about what the quotation said, pointing out that it's repeated, right? Pointing out this repetition. The Phaeacians had previously been described as ranking near the gods, but now Alcinous uses the actions of Poseidon to illustrate that his people are at the mercy of the immortals. Even the image of the misty sea, notice we're looking here at specific details, we're picking out details to discuss. Even the image of the misty sea reinforces the limits of man's knowledge and understanding in comparison with that of the gods, as man sets out on a sea, literally and metaphorically, on which he can expect only poor visibility. Yet despite his foreknowledge of the consequences, and despite his knowledge that the gods can do to them as the gods will, Alcinous chooses to help the wandering Odysseus, who is here described as needing safe passage, to suggest that he is on the common voyage of life with the rest of humankind. We are all passengers on a voyage over the misty sea of life. Human community is clearly more important to Alcinous than the pleasure of the gods. So look at how this paragraph is organized. We have a topic sentence that connects it back to the thesis. Then we have a minor example explored slightly by contrasting it to something else that connects it to the thesis. And then we have some analysis, more analysis of that passage. Then we have the major example. So it's organized by minor example followed by major example. And the rest of the paragraph is discussion of that major example, looking at particular details within the passage. This is a great model for writing about literature. Right? This is how you do more than skim across the surface. Right? It's a developed exploration rather than just a kind of quick reference and move on. Here's another example. I didn't include the thesis for this one, but it's clearly from a paper about Moira, about fate in ancient Greece, right? So they might have been asked to contrast the treatment of fate. In fact, this could come from the same paper, drawing that difference between Moira and the Hebrew concepts of covenant and of the promised land. So we have a topic sentence. One abiding question for readers of the Iliad is whether Zeus himself is bound by Moira or is rather its master. But when we look closely at the text, it becomes clear that even Zeus is relatively powerless in comparison to Moira. Notice that second part of the topic sentence. The topic sentence isn't just the question. If it was just one question is whether Zeus is more powerful or not, that's not a topic sentence, because it's a question, not an argument. And the topic sentence has to be supporting the thesis by making a point. So the point is Zeus is powerless. And so that gives you a task to focus the rest of the paragraph on. When you have a good topic sentence, you then have a focusing task for your paragraph. The rest of this paragraph is going to have to demonstrate that Zeus is powerless in comparison to Moira. It's going to do that again through example. An example is often the right organizing principle for a paragraph on literature. When, for example, the time comes for Patroclus' death, Homer seems to imply that Zeus is its cause. Now we have a quotation. All this time he looked down at them and pondered when Patroclus should die. Book 16, lines 680 through 81. So notice we have the citation by book and line number. Notice we also preserve the lines. When you quote fewer than 3 lines, you indicate line breaks with a slash. And so we have this quoted, and we've just quoted something, so we're going to discuss it. This passage does suggest a good deal of control on Zeus's part, but we should notice that Homer says Zeus pondered when Patroclus should die, not if he should die. So see the analysis being done there. They've taken the language and they've looked closely at it, and they've zeroed in on the words. Oh, it says when, not if. Right, so now we're doing analysis of the language of the poem. So when, not if he should die. Whatever Zeus declares, Patroclus must die. Homer prepares us to understand the irresistibility of Patroclus' doom by showing us Zeus's internal conflict over the death of his favorite mortal, Sarpedon. Right? So this one now is actually going to back up from Patroclus to Sarpedon to talk about a moment that foreshadows this key moment of Patroclus' death in the Iliad. Right? So notice, again, we're moving from one example to another, but it's not just random examples. It's examples within the same poem of the same point. So he then quotes the Sarpedon passage. Fate has it that Sarpedon, whom I love more than any man, is to be killed by Patroclus. Shall I take him out of battle while he still lives? Then the question mark there is in brackets because it wasn't there in the original. The sentence goes on. But this is from Book 16, lines 471 through 73. So now something's been quoted. It's got to be commented on. Zeus seems to entertain the notion that he can change Sarpedon's Moira. Right? So we're commenting on, hey, this sounds like it's the opposite of what we're arguing, right? But then we look closer. Hera, however, finds the idea ridiculous, and then it quotes Hera. And this is more than 3 lines, so it's in block quotation. Son of Kronos, what a thing to say, a mortal man whose fate has long been fixed, and you want to save him from rattling death? Do it, but don't expect all of us to approve. 16, 478 through 481. Now we've quoted at length, we're going to analyze at length. While we might take Hera's do it as an indication that Zeus can override Moira, it is also possible to read it as a dare, implying that there will be a great consequence if the father of the gods attempts to meddle with a mortal man's doom. Now that's a questionable interpretation, right? It's debatable, I should say. Not really questionable. It's not a bad interpretation, but it's a debatable one, and that's fine. Right? We're trying to make a debatable point. Hera goes on to explain to Zeus that the result of such an action would be chaos. To Homer, for whom mortality is the first and foremost fact of human life, to divorce humanity from death is to undo reality itself. It is to unmake the cosmos. Not even the father of the gods has that sort of power. So then we bring it back around to the topic sentence. So notice how the organization by examples works here. Notice the close reading, the looking at specific passages. All right, our final example is a paragraph about the Odyssey. So our topic sentence is, the inevitability of death permeates the smallest details of the Odyssey. Notice how that topic sentence narrows it down to one work. We're going to develop it. We're not going to throw everything in here so that we don't really say anything much about anything. We're going to narrow it down to the Odyssey. And it specifies that the topic we're going to look at in the Odyssey is the inevitability of death. Now, obviously, the Odyssey is about a lot of things. It's about family. It's about endurance. It's about wonder. There are a lot of things the Odyssey is about, but we're not going to try to cover everything the Odyssey is about in this paragraph. We're going to look particularly at the poem's view of the inevitability of death. So that's our topic sentence. The inevitability of death permeates the smallest details of the Odyssey. This inevitability is subtly expressed even in Penelope's words to the disguised Odysseus. So notice here we're moving directly to our major example. And that's a signal to the reader that this paragraph is going to focus really on just one example. It's going to focus on this major example of Penelope speaking to Odysseus before he's revealed himself. And so it gives the quotation then, if you were willing to sit with me and comfort me, my friend, no tide of sleep would ever close my eyes, but mortals cannot go forever sleepless. This the undying gods decree for all who live and die on earth, kind furrowed earth. Book 19, lines 632 through 36. So we've quoted. Now the rest of the paragraph is going to develop an analysis of that quotation. Penelope evokes the age-old analogy between sleep and death. Most ancient cultures saw a connection between these two states of existences, and it was common to compare sleep to death and death to sleep in Western culture all the way up through the Renaissance, as in Hamlet's to sleep perchance to dream. Right? So that's a generalization based on the author's reading. Even better might be if there was a source for that, if they've done some research on that connection, but it's fine the way it is. It's true. Penelope ties the two states of unconsciousness together through her use of the word mortal. So notice again, we're looking at details, specific diction, words used. This word, which Penelope uses to emphasize the fragility of human beings in need of rest, also reminds Homer's audience of the inevitability of death. Right? That's the meaning of the word, is the point the author's making. She could have said humans, or she could have said people, but she said mortals, which literally means someone capable of death. This word, which Penelope uses to emphasize the fragility of human beings in need of rest, also reminds Homer's audience of the inevitability of death. That inevitability is underscored through the metaphor of tide. So notice now what they're doing is looking at another key detail within the passage. A tide is a natural, inevitable, and regular fact, as are both death and sleep. See what the writer has done here. The writer has simply started by closely looking at the passage, meditating on it, so to speak, until something became clear, right? Asking questions. So you might look at a passage and say, I wonder why she says tide. Why tide? No tide of sleep. That's conspicuous, right? It's a little unusual. So what does it suggest? And you reflect on it. And this is how you close read literature. It's also good habit building for the reading of Scripture. A tide is a natural, inevitable, and regular fact, as are both death and sleep. Paragraph goes on. She moves from this sense of inevitability to once again evoke the bliss of the, quote, undying gods as a foil, that is a contrast to human misery. But the picture is not entirely bleak. In the passage's opening image of two friends sitting together to share comfort, we see Homer's emphasis on the human ability to draw from community comfort even in the midst of the worst suffering, a theme seen elsewhere in the poem's emphasis on fathers and sons. She ends this speech by noting that while men die on earth, they also live together on the kind furrowed earth. This closing image offers comfort in humanity's shared endeavors, in this case agriculture. The furrows are the farm, right? The furrowing of the ground, the tilling. The entire sense of this passage is thus that though we are all doomed individually, together we rise as a civilization to defeat death. So notice how this paragraph progresses toward this final point. It builds from this sense of inevitability. It shows that, it demonstrates that, and then it lands on this deeper point. That's a slightly different organization than the previous two we looked at, but is another fine way to organize a paragraph. Now, obviously, these are kind of ideal examples, but they should give you a sense of just what a paragraph about an ancient book might look like, and B, of the kinds of depth you should be aiming for, the kinds of analysis you should be aiming for, not just throwing the work at the page, but digging into it and seeing what it says by examining how it says it. Not just the surface meaning, but how it expresses itself. You should also from this get a sense of what paragraph unity looks like and what a topic sentence looks like as well. And if you have further questions about these examples or about writing in general, that's what office hours are for. Please come and see me.